Hi! This video will be somehow different from the other ones I made until now. It is about a very special author of the Bolognese fencing tradition who also happens to be our favorite fencing master. The problem is though, we don't know much about him, close to nothing actually. He's called Anonimo Bolognese, the Anonymous Bolognese author, and in this video I am going to call him simply Anonimo. But if we don't even have his name, what do we actually know about him? And what exactly did he leave behind? That's what we are going to cover today. Around the first years of the new millennium, Davide Longhi, one of the founders of the Italian Association for Historical Fencing, Sala d'Armi Achille Marozzo, was doing research in the library of Ravenna. Apparently by chance, he stumbled upon two manuscripts that seemed to be affiliated somehow to the Bolognese tradition. He called two of the co-founders, Marco Rubboli and Luca Cesari, and together they began to take a closer look on the writings with the numbers MS 345 and MS 346. Judging by the handwriting, the two manuscripts were clearly written by two different people, but by going through the content, they concluded that there was a high chance that both originated from the same mind and person. Not only a veteran fencer, but also a fencing teacher and master. Both manuscripts are part of one work that likely was meant to be published as a fencing book one day. The first part, MS 345, seemed to be written by the author himself. One of the first drafts maybe, that should have been revised afterwards. MS 346, on the other hand, seemed to be a fair copy already, written by a professional copyist. They were quickly able to definitely relate the text to the Bolognese fencing tradition. Not only is it treating the characteristic weapons and combinations of the era, but most of all it uses a very similar didactical approach and designations for its guards, footwork and blows. An analysis of the paper conducted by the staff of the library led to the conclusion that it dated back to the beginning of the 16th century, the first 2 decades at most, which makes Anonimo an ambassador of times before Marozzo and Manciolino entered the stage. Marco and Luca even speculated that he could be, in fact, none other than Guido Antonio di Luca himself, the master of Achille Marozzo, whose fencing manual was published allegedly sometime after his death in 1532, but to this day we do not know of a single copy of his book. Marozzo himself describes his master as Maestro Guido Antonio de Luca Bolognese, della cui scuola si può ben dire che siano più guerrieri usciti che del troiano cavallo. Translated, Bolognese master Guido Antonio de Luca, from which it can easily be said that from his school emerged more warriors than from the belly of the Trojan horse. Sounds pretty awesome, right? The first manuscript, MS 345, covers fundamental basics of fencing: guards, blows, footwork, and the author's philosophy. It also contains a long part with techniques for the single sword. The second manuscript, MS 346, starts off with an incomplete text on the two-handed sword, which suggests that there probably was a third manuscript that would have gone in between the two. It either was lost or intended to be written later on. Interestingly, the part on the two-handed sword is very similar to Marozzo's third assalto. After that, the text covers various weapons and combinations, like for example sword and buckler, or targa, sword and rotella, and so on. I'm now going to talk about two specific pages of the first manuscript. They gave me a deeper understanding on how I could approach fencing and also martial arts in general, from a psychological perspective. In C.13v he writes: La vera virtù di quest'arte consiste in essere terribile ed avere in sé ferocità grandissima, et li colpi seino di tal asprezza e crudi che il più leggero colpo sia sufficiente a mettergli grandissimo timore, et se possibile fuse parerà il gran diavolo, et mostrargli e dargli la morte. A possible translation to English that should give you an idea could be: the real virtue of this art is it to be dreadful and of immense cruelty, and each strike should be of such a roughness and crudeness that even the lightest attack would instill your opponent with great fear, and if possible, act like you were the devil himself bringing death upon him. This passage sounds very theatrical, but the less rules there are in a fight and the more serious it gets, the more they become true. When fighting for your life, not the one that has practiced more techniques wins, but the more ruthless one does. Being a very hesitant and careful fighter myself, I always think of Anonymous words when I want to remind myself that it is my priority not to get hit, yes. But that's not enough. If I have no chance of getting out of a fight, there is no way to survive or win by staying passive and defending only. While it might give me some extra time, it will only delay the eventual outcome. If I do not attack and really mean it at some point, I will get hit sooner or later. And even more important, this passage contains some insight on how to submit your opponent to psychological stress. This way you prevent him from forcing his tempo and game on you, while you are doing exactly that to him. An extremely effective and important concept that sounds easy, but it isn't. I'm sure everybody who does sparring within the world of martial arts would agree on this one. Not long after this passage, Anonimo talks about the 4 qualities a fencer should strive towards: animo, ingegno, forza, and destrezza. Now, unfortunately, he doesn't go into detail about these 4 qualities. Therefore, what I'm about to say is more than ever a possible interpretation. So, here we go. Animo is actually kind of difficult to translate here. Depending on the context, it can take on various different meanings. Here I would go with commitment, or maybe even determination to kill. Next up is ingegno, which I would say is wits. Then we have forza, strength, and destrezza, which could simply be skill. So to sum it up, the ideal fencer is skillful with the sword and has great weapon control, destrezza. He obviously is well trained and has physical strength, forza. Not only has he trained his body, but also his mind by studying techniques and tactics. During a fight, he is alert and observant, ingegno. Last but not least, he's determined to fight. He's not hesitant, he takes the initiative. He really means every single attack, animo. What makes Anonimo so special to us? After working with his text for several years, we find that while his style is clearly of the Bolognese school, it differs in a few fundamental points. Not so much from a technical point of view maybe, but from a philosophical and psychological one. Unlike Manciolino and Dalla Gocchia, for example, he does not seem to embrace elegant and good-looking fencing. His approach is a much more functional one, almost brutal. The smaller your movements and the faster you kill the opponent, the happier Anonimo would probably be. This also matches the fact that his work was probably written long before the texts of the other authors were published. Probably in a time when the Bolognese style of fencing was still closely tied to military use on the battlefield, and not mainly to duels, which would slowly but constantly become more important during the 16th century. Anonimo to us represents the dark side of combat and therefore fills a gap that other authors tend to omit while focusing only on the beauty and presentation of the art. Judging from his text, Anonimo had fought on the battlefield probably much more than once. Also, compared to his colleagues Marozzo and Manciolino, he's far, far less pious. He's of the opinion that brutality beats grace. If this was Star Wars, he would probably be a Sith-Lord on the dark side. And since the dark side has not only cookies, but in this case also side swords, we're happy to visit him there, I suppose. If this video made you curious about Anonimo, make sure to check out the video description below. I will include links to the transcript published by the Italian Association, the English translation of Stephen Fratus, and the German articles on the topic we published on our blog. If you would be interested in more videos like this one, or more content about Anonimo, just let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this type of content. If yes, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. See you in the next one. I'm gonna get a cookie now. Bye!